Welcome to A Call to Action, a series presented by Great Eastern Radio and Brattleboro Community Television. We're covering many different topics, from what it looks like for people in a crisis in the food supply chain and what we're doing about it. Today, we're talking with former governor for the state of Vermont, Howard Dean, who held the position from 1991 to 2003 and going on to make his own run at the White House. One of the things that keeps popping up in the news today is mail-in voting and the concern and what it looks like 7 months from now. So we'd like to discuss that with you today. Welcome to A Call to Action.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we assume you're sheltering in place at home here in Vermont?
I'm in my house in Burlington.
All right. Excellent. All right. So there are a lot of questions at the moment in this point in time. And we get that with everything changing and we don't really know anything, there's going to be a lot of conjecture in the questions asked when, again, with the answers given. With that understanding, how do you feel the 2020 elections will unfold?
Well, it's almost impossible to tell given all that's going on. I'm pretty optimistic. The president is incompetent, as most people think is the case, and he's dishonest, and he's a crook. So, we should be able to beat him. But many things can happen in an election, and I think it was a big shock to all of us that he was elected in the first place. But I am optimistic. I'm also optimistic that we're going to take over the Senate. I think there's 9 Republican seats that are in trouble, and that's pretty much confirmed by the Republicans in terms of charting their spending. They're supporting John Cornyn in Texas. I never thought that he'd be in trouble, but obviously he is.
Okay. Yeah, there was. I know that is one branch of the government that we need, and something that I've often said is, okay, you at some point in time you can no longer blame the child. You have to begin to blame the parents, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing in the Senate, at least by my estimation.
Well, I certainly would blame Mitch McConnell for a great deal, and I think most of the others are just blind followers, and they're not executing their duty.
I would agree. Now, our president has currently gone on record and that stating that mail-in voting is a bad idea and it could lead to voter fraud. Is he right?
No, of course not. He just makes that up as he goes along. I don't pay any attention to what Trump says. Has no credibility. He says 3 different things in one sentence that contradict each other, and he's told something like 10,000 lies in the first 3 years of administration. So why would you pay any attention to things Trump says? As the mainstream media politely says, Trump asserted without evidence. And there's, in fact, this is used in 5 states completely. In Oregon, there are no polls anymore, except for there's a few pop-ups essentially for homeless people and so forth, so that they can vote. But generally speaking, everybody gets a ballot. And that's a system that's actually under contemplation with the Secretary of State and the governor in this state. I think it's a great idea. It does increase turnout by 7 or 8%. Everybody gets a chance to vote, and it's much easier for them. And in the end, it's cheaper, although of course you have to pay for the, sending the ballots back and forth.
Right. And so, but it's curious because I think all states have early voting, and of course our military that are abroad get to vote via mail. So I thought it was a slightly unusual statement.
Well, the Republicans are worried that the more people that vote, the less they'll do, which is true. The last two Republican presidents were elected with a minority of the votes. Bush did get a 500,000 vote plurality on his reelection, but his election and Trump's election were when they didn't get, the Democrats got more votes than they did. So they have some right to fear that. But trying to jimmy the results by restricting voting and all these phony voter IDs and all this kind of stuff, this is all nonsense. How about Trump claiming that in New Hampshire they bust people in from Massachusetts? I mean, these people are just liars, and you just have to tell the truth. I mean, Bernie used to call them pathological liars. Well, that's the fact.
Right. It is. It's a strange path, but then we're on a lot of strange paths these days.
Yes, we are, and actually, it's a very dangerous path, and I'm hoping that we're going to do something about it.
Well, as do I. Postponing an election, is that possible? Is that something that we have to worry about?
Well, we should always worry about everything, but the House and the Senate would have to vote to postpone the election. The United States Senate and the United States House. I think that's incredibly unlikely.
Okay. And I'm just going to push back on that a little bit because I think we've been seeing a lot of unlikely behavior. So I do get concerned about it. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I never have been, but I mean, what I keep seeing over and over will break you down. I mean, what I think we're okay in the House. I do worry if it hits the Senate, though.
Well, it would require a bill that is the law states that the election shall be on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So that's what the law is. I don't think you can counteract that with an executive order. In fact, I know you can't. Most constitutional scholars don't believe you can. I think if the president actually tried to do that, what would happen is a large number of states would have the election anyway, as it would be working its way through the courts.
So it would move to a state-to-state decision.
Well, the states run the elections. The president's claiming that he has all this power that he doesn't have. He doesn't have the power to open states or undo governor's emergency orders or anything of that sort. And he doesn't have the power to run elections. The federal government doesn't run elections in this country. They're run by the 50 states and the 5 territories.
Okay. All right. Well, that puts me at ease a little bit.
A little bit. Trump will try, though. Trump tried to shut down Congress the other day, which he doesn't have the power to do either. So
I know.
The problem is he says all this stuff and the cable stations religiously play it all, and then they counteract it in the narrative, but he's got the biggest megaphone.
Yeah.
And it's a major problem. I think the mainstream media is a huge problem in this country.
Yeah, it definitely it can feed it, and as it scrambles for ratings, for sure. I get a little concerned about that. These everyday press conferences have turned more into rallies.
That's what they are, and the media has no business televising them because they're completely unfactual. And for them to televise Trump's propaganda conferences and not Biden's town meetings is absurd.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody loves a good car wreck, right?
Yes. Well, we hope not to be the victims.
Right. Exactly. Of course, everything right now, we have 100% focus on the pandemic, and of course, we have no way of knowing when this thing will be over. But let's just say it's over in 60 days. What do these candidates after this need to be talking about?
Well, it's not going to be over in 60 days. I'm happy to answer the question. I, as you may remember, I also have an MD, and I'm not a public health official, but I have spent an enormous amount of time talking to public health people who are, very, very smart. And by the way, I think Mark Levine is doing a terrific job, our health commissioner.
He is.
And so this business of flattening the curve, which we've been incredibly successful at doing in Vermont, that does not decrease the rate of infection. It simply spreads it out. So we're all, the same people who are going to get infected are eventually going to get infected. It's just not going to happen nearly as fast as if we observe social distancing. The purpose of flattening the curve was to save lives, but it's to save lives by making sure the healthcare infrastructure doesn't collapse as it has in New York, for example, New York City.
Right.
So we're not going to suddenly 60 days from now not have any more infections. The only time that's going to happen is when we have a vaccine. Then it will be under control, and I think that's 12 to 18 months from now. So I think we're going to be talking about COVID during the campaign. We're also presumably going to be talking about other issues. There was a fascinating interview on VPR this morning with Jeb Spalding, the chancellor of the state college system. And he thinks, and I agree with him, that education is going to be transformed by this. And while it may be transformed in a good way, it's also going to be unbelievably disruptive. And those are the kinds of things we should be talking about in the campaign, not just COVID virus and what are we going to do about it immediately, but also what are we going to do about the huge disruptions as a result. Another thing is employer-based healthcare has turned out not to be a good idea. So now what are we going to put in its place? Healthcare, universal healthcare that's not employer-based is going to be very important. So these are huge issues that are going to come up. They're going to come up in the campaign, but they will come up in the context of coronavirus.
All right. So your firm belief is that we're still talking about the coronavirus into the election.
We're going to have to, because it's going to be a reality in everybody's life. I believe that both the primary and the general election will most likely be conducted by mail here in this state, because I think it's too much of a risk to put. I mean, we're going to see what happens in Wisconsin when the Republicans thought they were going to suppress the vote. by having an in-person election in the middle of a pandemic, which didn't work because people were so angry about it. Our guys aren't going to do that here. Our Republicans are sane in this. I love Vermont because we still all get along together. We may disagree, but we treat each other as human beings. And I can't imagine that happening here. But I do believe that we're going to have mail elections in both the primary and the general, simply because that's going to be the smartest, health-wise, the smartest thing to do.
Well, we tend to lead the way, our little state, and the way we do things, and for that reason, I'm very proud of the way we act, and even when we reach across the party lines. So, with all that in mind, I've been kind of regurgitating something myself when people ask me about this question about getting the states open up and getting the economy rolling and doing all that and being hurried because people are panicking. But if people are dying, nobody's buying. All right. And
Right.
by that, I mean, if there's nobody in the economy, there is no economy. Justifiably, people are worried about it, and they desperately want to get back to business as usual. And I think we know where you stand on that alone. I mean, you just cited it, but how does this roll out? How do you, if you were still governor, how would you get the state back into?
I would probably not be doing much different than Scott is and Levine and so forth. What they're going to do is be very cautious about trying to reopen. And they should. I think we're going to, at some point, and it looks like we're in a very good place right now, relatively speaking. I mean, obviously people are still dying in Vermont, so you can't say it's a good place, but it's a better place, a much better place than it could be, and a much better place, frankly, than it will be when some of these Midwestern people like Kristi Noem, are just going to lay waste to their own populations by not having any restrictions. But you have to try opening very, very slowly, very, very carefully, piece at a time. And then you've got to watch. We really do need universal testing. This was the biggest screw up of the many, many screw ups of the Trump administration, is not to have testing. All this stuff, by the way, was recommended in a pandemic task force that was started by George W. Bush and continued by Barack Obama. And Trump just fired everybody when he got there because he's just a megalomaniac or something's the matter with him psychiatrically. I'm not exactly sure what the diagnosis is. So he threw all that stuff out. We need to go back to that. The way to manage a pandemic is to test people, because there are an awful lot of asymptomatic carriers who can spread the disease around without knowing they're sick themselves, which is actually what happened in many cases. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very easily, quote unquote, spreadable disease. I mean, it is very contagious, and obviously a very serious one, as we know from bitter experience. So caution is the way, and as Phil says, let's pay attention to the science as we roll out. So I suspect there'll be an easing, and I suspect there'll be a time where the easing went just a little too far and they have to tighten back up. We're going to titrate this until we get a vaccine, and then we'll do mass vaccination, and then we'll presumably solve the problem. I mean, that's a lot easier to say than it is to do.
Sure. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of moving parts, and I try to be fair to everybody by just saying, nobody pandemics well. All right.
Yes.
And we're all figuring this out on the fly, and this comes right from, we'll just stay within the borders of Vermont. And I do think that Phil Scott has been doing a good job, and that whole team that he has put forth has been doing a good job. And I think you've echoed that. You feel the same way, correct?
I do. I mean, we have policy disagreements on healthcare and, minimum wage and parental leave and stuff like that. But this is important. I mean, nobody can foresee this. I had 9/11 on my watch, but that was a federal problem and it was 300 miles away. And so in Vermont, it lasted about 5 days while flights were disrupted and all that. This is a much more serious problem. But fortunately, Phil, as I would have done and others would have done, I can't think of a governor in Vermont that wouldn't have done this, is paying careful attention to the science and making his decision based on the facts and not based on politics. And I think that's extremely important.
Right. Well, it's good. It's just nice to hear from somebody who would have been in that role if you had stayed in that role and would have been dealing with it. So We thank you for your time today. I know that you're busy. You're still actively working, and we'll see you on TV from time to time.
Less so now that I have had a falling out with MSNBC over their Trump collage that they have every night.
Well, you're welcome back on a call to action anytime.
Well, that's good. I appreciate that.
All right.
More important audience anyway.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Howard Dean, take care.
All right. See you later.
Bye.